Okay, good morning to everyone. Let me say that it's a pleasure, of course, to be here today. I appreciate it very much, and I'm honored to be able to talk with you about these issues related to data protection, intelligence systems, and law in general. My name is Anna Capoluongo. I'm a lawyer, I'm a data protection officer, a certified DPO, member of the pool of experts of European Data Protection Board, and I'm also a contract lecturer in the subject of artificial intelligence, data protection, and new technologies in general. So today our journey will pass through 4 evolutions, so to speak, of AI, drawing inspiration from the original film A Space Odyssey, because I believe that if we don't know where we came from, we cannot even understand where we might get to, by which I mean the future, with reference to the complex issues related to an algorithmic system. And in the second part of this speech, I will mainly focus on how to prepare a sustainable future by focusing on algorithmic transparency and accountability to achieve the so-called responsible computing or algorithmic accountability. So here we have the HAL 9000 from the original film, which is a fiction, claiming that AI is error-free. But the European Commission reminds us that AI is not a fiction, it is real, and it's already part of our lives. And we have proof of this, evidence of this every single day, as for example, in the case of the chatbot Replica, the use of which was recently suspended by the Italian privacy authority due to the invasiveness of the tool and the dangers to data subjects, so individuals, and also the special categories of data, personal data processed by Replica. So the potential dangerousness of this system is in fact known, that has also been highlighted in the latest regulatory proposals, such, for example, the AI Act, so the Artificial Intelligence Regulation. And the objective for me is clear, is to put man before machine, in the sense of using machine to serve man, to serve human being, and not vice versa. So having said that, let us quickly go through the 4 chapters of evolutionary path of AI, starting with the first one, which is about the origin of the artificial intelligence and also its different types. So as we can see, these systems began to exist a long time ago, and one of these first computers, I mean mechanical calculator, in the world dates back as far as the 1st century before Christ. I mean the Antikythera mechanism that was a planetary complex. But what is AI? As you know, to date, there's no single globally accepted definition of AI. So let's say that artificial intelligence systems attempt to recreate one or more manifestation of intelligence that human beings are capable of. And so we can have a various type of AI, several types of AI, as we have various type of intelligence of human beings. So we can have, for example, we can have, for example, narrow AI, a general AI, or super AI. So a narrow AI or a weak AI is an AI that is capable to do specific tasks. A general AI or strong AI is able to take knowledge from something, but also transfer this knowledge to another domain. And then we can have a super AI, not today, maybe in the future, because it's an artificial intelligence that is smarter and more intelligent than a human being. So I said that there is no a one and only definition of AI, but a few days ago, the European Parliament has just agreed to adopt a definition the definition of AI proposed by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And this is very important because it's able to close a critical contention point and also ensuring a consistent definition across the whole UE. So AI system means a machine-based system that is designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy and that can generate output. For example, prediction, recommendation, or decisions influencing a physical or a virtual environment. And of course, since we are talking about UE, in this slide, you can see the main documents developed by the European or at a European level on artificial intelligence, in which the focus is clearly on the ethical aspects of AI. So as you can see, there is a code of ethics, strategy for an ethical approach, ethical guidelines, or I don't know, framework on ethical aspects. So ethics is the focus. And let me say that to be ethical, AI must be substantially reliable, which means compliance with the law, respect for the principle, but also solidity. And let's move on to the second chapter, which in the film is dedicated to the landing on the lunar crater Clavius, and here sees our moon landing on the complex terrain of the proposal of AI regulation, so the AI Act. The proposal is composed of several titles, there are 11 in total, dedicated to the distinction between prohibited AI system or practices, high-risk system, and non-high-risk systems. In addition, the proposal also provides for compliance verification procedures for, of course, artificial intelligence, so that the AI can be given access to the market. The proposal has a risk-based approach, and as you can see, the risk can be full or total, or high risk or medium risk. And in fact, this proposal allows for the distinction between different types of products categorized according to the risk, and consequently also provide the solution that can be adopted, starting from the prohibition of use in the case of systems that, for example, may cause physical or physiological harm in the first line of the slide, to the possibility of using products that can, for example, interact with individuals. In this case, it's provided that they have been duly informed of all the elements necessary for understanding the tool and the processing of the personal data. So to simplify and summarize, we need to keep it simple because the principle of transparency requires that any information and communication relating to the AI system and the processing of the personal data be easily accessible and easy to understand, and clear and plain language have to be used. Then we have to have a risk-based approach, as we have already seen, yes, but with a specification. I mean, if we have a high-risk AI, maybe a self-assessment might not be sufficient, and instead a defined regulatory process, maybe with public stakeholder participation, is very important. Apart from the high-risk system, there will remain many situations in between, no? From high, medium, not high, and so on. So maybe some type of self-assessment mechanism similar to the DPR, data protection impact assessment in the field of data protection, would definitely help. And you can find something like this in the NIST framework for the AI. And then the last point, I think it's to remain agile. I mean, we have to build a system, also from the point of view of the regulation, that allows us to manage the change and the evolution, for example, of the society, of new arm, new tool, new systems, without a need to restart all over again. So we need substantially flexibility. Okay. And move on to the chapter 3. 18 months later in the film, but also in our journey, a new mission gets underway. And in this case, thanks to the European Council, because it proposed changes to the draft of the AI Act. And these changes focus mainly on the following points. For example, limitation of the definition of AI, or the extension to individuals of the prohibited practice of AI, for example, in the case of the social scoring, but also the assignment of liability and roles, especially with reference to providers and end users. This is very interesting. It is a general exception to the classification of high-risk systems. So the Council said if the AI is classified as high-risk system, but it does not lead to risky outputs to fundamental rights and freedoms, then it should not be considered a high-risk system. Interesting, but scary. And then we have also a relationship system, a relationship system between liability under the GDPR and the AI legislation or other regulation, for example, and so on, as you can see, transparency obligation and system of sanction. And then let's go to the final chapter, the 4th chapter, which in the movie is Jupiter and Beyond the Infinite, but here we can call a Brand New Day, maybe, consists of important new action points such as Machinery Products Regulation, Data Governance Act, Digital Service Act, Digital Market Act, and so on. But the focus is, the overall objective is to promote innovation, growth, and competitiveness of these systems, but all while making the protection of data subjects and their rights and personal data more effective in the digital reality. So, to build a proper future, what needs to be done? We know that corporate business must be based on governance, risks, and compliance, which becomes a competency that enables the company to achieve goals, so the governance, to manage opportunities and risks efficiently, and to act in accordance with regulations, compliance. All of this in a long-term manner. So how to prepare an adequate future and a proper management of business, AI, privacy, etc. models. It is necessary to learn how to build and use artificial intelligence systems correctly, both from a system design point of view and from the point of view of correct algorithmic training, without forgetting the dimension of awareness and training of both operators and end users. But an adequate future will also have to pass through the adaptation of relevant legislation, as well as through an impact assessment applicable to artificial intelligence models, and also an interdisciplinary approach with regard to the risks, benefits, and proper user of the systems. So going in order, if we talk about AI design, we talk about data protection impact assessment, which in this case, in the case of AI, is called AIA, Algorithmic Impact Assessment. We have several examples of this that we can look to, and namely the Canada AIA tool, the Opinion for 2020 of the European Data Protection Supervisor, the recommendation of the ICO, so the Privacy Authority in UK, the guide on self-assessment of the CNIL, the Privacy Authority in France, the tool devised by the Professor Floridi. The name is CAP-AI. But all these focus on technical issues to the detriment of the potential effects on the fundamental rights of data subject, both as such and in their social dimension. I mean, group privacy, I mean the projection of their personal rights into the social dimension, because one thing is my privacy rights or data protection rights, and another thing is my data protection rights in the social dimension. So we need a multi-impact assessment that needs 4 steps to manage this risk. Define the scope, the context, and the criteria, then assess the risk to trustworthy, i.e., treat the risks and govern the risk management process, more or less, very quickly. And if we look at the training of AI system, I believe that the most important and most sensitive point focus on bias, so error in judgment, and data protection or information security. First, bias. To reduce bias, you have to focus on data quality, but also on data quantity. So the volume of the data is very important. You must not have too much or too little, but exactly the right and sufficient quantity to obtain certain results. Otherwise, we could end up in the phenomena known as underfitting or overfitting, where in the first case, we would have too little data and the underlying statistical model will not be able to capture the trend in this data. In the second case, we will have too much data and therefore too complex model and too many parameters, but we would arrive at the same output, so uncertain results. We just talk about quantity, but with reference to the quality of the data, it is necessary that they are able to perfectly represent the part of the world we need to represent, and that they are therefore useful for the specific purpose we want to achieve. So quality, but also quantity. And with reference to data protection and information security, point 2, I simply want to point out that these systems have the same potential for use and configuration, or bad use and bad configuration, as the other technologies, but entail risks that are decidedly unique because of the data processed, also personal and spatial category of data, and the asymmetry of the information between the data controller and the end user, as well as because of the technological complexity that in the field of the AI intervenes on the so-called black box effect, and therefore on the transparency and explainability of the algorithm. For example, on the comprehensibility of the inputs, outputs, and the actual functioning of the AI. In this sense, the problem is that artificial intelligence is capable of producing results, but the process by which it produces these results and the reason why the algorithm makes specific choice or the decision are not fully comprehensible and explainable from the point of view of the end users. So it's evident that transparency is particularly important to ensure correctness in the use of AI and algorithm, and to identify possible distortion in the data set that could arise, for instance, in discriminatory situations. And as for the training of the operators, the focus is on the accountability that fall on the data controller. The principle of the accountability means the controller should be responsible for and able to demonstrate compliance with the rules, in this case, with the GDPR. So accountability that falls on data controller, which includes, in addition to the duty to train its staff also the duty to provide correct information to the end users, and I mean data subjects, pursuant to Article 13 and 14 of the GDPR, as well as maybe sector regulation. For example, in Italy, we have Decreto Trasparenza or Transparency Decree that provides for specific obligation to give information on the part of the employer in the case of the use of automated decision-making or monitoring systems. But the profile of the end user's awareness should not be forgotten either. In this sense, European Data Protection Board has issued a recommendation that recall another opinion, Opinion 5, 2021, and is particularly interesting because it envisages a responsibility, a liability under for both providers and end users, and also a specific liability for users for the correct use of intelligent systems. And so we come to the last point, the liability. A dialogue between Al and Bowman introduced it to us. Bowman is asking Al to open the door, but Al doesn't want to. So as you can see, Al said, "I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can do that. This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it. And I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen. And in the end, Dave, this conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye." So we are facing a conscious AI who does not want to obey orders and is about to give rise to the damage. So we are talking about liability, of course. The more we move towards a strong AI, or maybe a super AI, the more our responsibility grows. So clearly, this aspect of liability must not only be thought in terms of civil liability or economic damages, but also with reference to everything that is not easily quantifiable on an economic level, such as aspect of privacy, for example, or rights and freedoms and democracy. So maybe we can think of using already existing solution. For example, in the Italian Civil Code, we have the liability for the exercise of dangerous activities, or also damages that arise from inanimate objects. But we also can use maybe the Product Liability Directive. The important thing is providing that these rules are interpreted excessively, because they don't represent the AI word specifically, no? Or we can create maybe new rules, such in the case of the AI Act, no? The regulation on artificial intelligence. Or we can think about an insurance system for AI producer, or a guarantee funds, or even a creation of an electronic personality for the AI. Or maybe we can think about use the liability of artificial intelligence systems. For example, we have the Artificial Intelligence Liability Directive that concern extra-contractual civil liability rules. And this directive would ensure that any type of victim, so individuals or businesses, can be compensated if they are harmed by the fault or omission of a provider, of a developer, of a user of AI, resulting in a damage covered by the national law, for example, health, property, privacy, and so on. So, in conclusion, to quote Professor Floridi, because he's an Italian, of course, Italian guy, the more the computing capacity increase, the more the law must also increase, which in this sense, I mean, in the world of the AI system, it's to be understood as not only as a code like a civil code or a penal code, criminal code, but also as a code string. I mean, as programming, and thus as governance of the technical and technological part, as well as of the correct handling of data and the protection of the data subject for responsible computing that should be anthropocentric and thus should aim and should point to the principle of human right by default. So thank you for listening. If we have any question, I'm here.
Thank you, Anna, for your brilliant and exceptional speech. I am a fan of Kubrick and of the famous film Space Odyssey, so really enjoyable for me your speech. Artificial intelligence is a not topic. Just one question, I know it's a tricky question. On your opinion, the main critical issues concerning artificial intelligence and privacy issues. Choose one main critical topic on your opinion.
The first one and the only, the black box. The transparency and the explainability of the AI process and decision. Of course, this is the most important and most risky, of course.
Yes. I fully agree. I think it's one of the most hot and delicate topics of artificial intelligence. Pardon for my horrible English. Any question about these topics? No question. So Anna, thank you again for your speech, and I'm waiting for our technical support for next speech.